They laughed when I asked where the password was written, and that was the moment I understood I had become invisible in my own family. I am 78 years old, not deaf, not senile, not stupid. My hands shake a little when I'm tired. Yes. My eyes need strong glasses. But my mind has carried a house, 2 children, a marriage, a widowhood, and 40 years of work. Still, that afternoon, they looked at me like I was a piece of outdated furniture someone forgot to throw away. "Mom, you don't need to worry about this," my son Daniel said, already smiling before he finished the sentence. "Technology isn't really your thing." My daughter-in-law chuckled and added, "It's cute that you're trying, though." Cute at my age. They were standing around the kitchen table with their phones in their hands, fingers flying across the screens like they were born with them attached. I was the only one sitting. I had asked a simple question about the new banking app they insisted I install on my phone. The old way, with paper statements, had become inconvenient, they said. For them, of course, not for me. I smiled back, the way I've learned to do. You smile so you don't look difficult. You smile so you're not accused of being bitter. You smile because if you stop smiling, they start talking slower, louder, like you're already halfway gone. "Oh, I know," I said. "I'm old-fashioned." That word always makes them relax. Old-fashioned means harmless, manageable, not a threat. They took the phone from my hands without asking. My grandson barely looked up as he tapped something and said, "There, you don't need to understand it. Just press here if anything pops up." I watched him, not his hands, his face. The way his jaw tightened for just a second when a notification appeared. The way he turned the screen slightly away from me without even thinking about it. It was a small thing. Younger people don't realize how much we notice when we stop being part of the center. I've lived long enough to know that secrets don't announce themselves. They leak. After they left, the house went quiet again. The kind of quiet that settles into the walls when you live alone too long. I made myself tea and sat by the window with my phone lying on the table like a foreign object. I didn't touch it right away. For years, I let them handle things. Bills, emails, online stuff. They said it was easier. They said it was safer. They said I'd only get confused. And maybe I believed them because believing them meant I didn't have to see how little space I now took up in their lives. But that day, something had shifted. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Clearer. I picked up the phone again and pressed the button my grandson showed me. The screen lit up. A list appeared. Transactions, dates, amounts. Most of it looked normal at first glance, though I didn't yet understand all of it. Still, I stared the way I used to stare at my children when they were lying. Calmly, patiently, waiting for the mistake. My eyes caught on a name I didn't recognize. Then another. Then a payment scheduled for a service I had never agreed to. I told myself it was probably nothing, that I was tired, that this was exactly why they said I shouldn't get involved. But my heart didn't believe that. I leaned back in my chair and laughed softly, alone in the kitchen. They thought I didn't understand technology. What they never understood was me. If you enjoy the stories here, dear, you're welcome to join our Patreon. There you'll find exclusive tales that never appear on YouTube, and new stories come out earlier than anywhere else. The link is just below. We're waiting for you. I didn't sleep well that night. Not because of fear, but because my mind wouldn't stop arranging memories the way it does when it's finally allowed to speak. At 78, nights are long companions. You wake up for water, for the bathroom, for no reason at all. The house creaks. The refrigerator hums, and your thoughts come back like old neighbors who knock only when you're alone. I lay there, thinking about how easily they'd laughed earlier, not cruelly, casually, as if my ignorance were a settled fact, like my age or the color of my hair. In the morning, I moved slowly on purpose. I wanted to feel my body, remind myself it was still mine. The stiffness in my knees, the careful way I reached for the kettle, the pause before bending down. This body raised children. It scrubbed floors. It held a man's hand as he died. And now it was apparently too fragile to understand a phone. They had started doing that years ago, deciding things for my own good. Selling the car I still drove fine. Switching doctors without asking. Moving my accounts online because paper mail was unsafe. Every change was wrapped in concern. Every concern took something away. After breakfast, I sat at the small desk by the window, the one they joked about once. "Do you even use that anymore?" they'd asked. I never answered. I just kept my letters there, insurance papers, old notebooks, proof of a life that existed before passwords. I turned the phone on again. This time I didn't rush. I wrote things down. Exactly what appeared. Exactly what I pressed. I've always trusted pen and paper more than memory. Memory softens things. Paper doesn't. There were transfers scheduled every month. Not large enough to cause alarm, but steady. Names that meant nothing to me. Services I had never used. I told myself again that there must be explanations. Children are busy. Systems are complicated. And yet, I remembered how quickly they'd taken the phone from my hands when I asked questions. I wasn't angry yet. Anger wastes energy. I was tired in a different way. The kind of tired that comes when you realize you've been simplifying yourself for others. I thought about how often I'd said, "You know better than me," just to keep the peace. How many times I'd laughed at jokes made at my expense so the room wouldn't grow awkward. How often I'd chosen silence because it was easier than being corrected. By noon, I had pages of notes and a headache behind my eyes. I closed the phone and made soup, the kind that takes time. Chopping vegetables calmed me. The rhythm reminded me who I was before everything became digital and fast and dismissive. In the afternoon, my son called. "Just to check in," he said. His voice was light, distracted. "Everything okay with the app?" he asked. "Yes," I replied, and for the first time, I meant something different than what he heard. After the call ended, I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of the phone. An old woman stared back. Lines, silver hair, a face the world no longer asked permission from. But the eyes were still sharp, still patient. They thought I didn't understand technology. What they never noticed was how well I understood patterns. And I had seen this one before, long ago, when people assumed I was too polite to pay attention. The real change didn't come from the money. It came from an email that wasn't meant for me. It arrived 2 days later, early in the morning, while I was still in my robe. I only saw it because I had decided to open the little envelope icon instead of waiting for someone else to tell me what was important. The subject line was casual, almost lazy, as if written in a hurry. My name was spelled wrong. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Spam, maybe. I've lived long enough to know the world is full of mistakes, but something about it made me sit down before opening it, the way I used to sit before difficult conversations. The message wasn't long. It referred to her account and keeping things quiet until next quarter. There was a sentence that stopped me completely. "She doesn't check this stuff anyway." She, not Mom. not Grandma. She. My hands were steady when I reread it. That surprised me. I felt no rush of blood, no trembling. Just a slow tightening behind my ribs, like a door closing. I checked the sender. A familiar name. Someone who'd hugged me recently. Someone who'd corrected me gently when I mispronounced the name of an app. I checked the recipients. My name was there too, only because they'd forgotten to remove it. People think technology reveals too much all at once. It doesn't. It reveals things the same way life does, piece by piece, if you're patient. I didn't reply. I didn't forward it. I didn't call anyone. I copied it into a notebook instead, writing the sentences out by hand, exactly as they were written. There is something about seeing words in ink that makes them heavier, more accountable. That afternoon, I went back to the banking app. Slowly, carefully. I followed the dates mentioned in the email. I cross-checked them with the transfers I'd already written down. They lined up too neatly to be coincidence. I remembered how often I'd been told, "Don't worry, it's all handled." How many times I'd nodded because arguing requires energy, and at my age, people think you should conserve it, as if dignity were a luxury item. By evening, I understood one thing clearly. This wasn't chaos. It was organization. Quiet, efficient, built on the assumption that I was done paying attention. I cooked dinner and ate it alone, chewing slowly, tasting every bite. There's a strange clarity that comes when you accept you've been underestimated. It sharpens you. Later, I sat at the desk again and opened settings, menus, things I had once been told not to touch. I pressed buttons and waited. When I made a mistake, I wrote it down and corrected it. I didn't rush. Rushing is for people who are afraid of being caught. Around 10, the phone rang. My granddaughter this time. Her voice was warm, careless, young. "Grandma, Dad says you're finally getting into the modern world?" She laughed. "Yes," I said, looking at the screen in my hand. "I am." After the call, I turned the phone face down and rested my hands on the table. For years, I had been grateful for being included at all. Now I realized I had been included only as long as I stayed useful and quiet. They thought I didn't understand technology. What they didn't understand was that I had spent a lifetime learning how systems work. Families, money, silence. And once you see the structure, the rest is only detail. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not because I was afraid, but because I was done explaining myself. The next morning, I cleared the desk completely. No letters, no old notebooks, no framed photograph of my late husband. Just the phone, a pen, and a fresh pad of paper. I made myself sit straight, the way I used to when balancing accounts late at night after everyone else was asleep. My body remembered that posture. My mind did too. They think learning stops at a certain age. That curiosity dries up with wrinkles. What actually happens is that no one expects you to learn anymore, so they stop watching you. I started with the basics: settings, permissions, notifications. I wrote down every word I didn't understand and looked it up, slowly, patiently. When something confused me, I didn't curse it. I treated it like a stubborn child, firm, calm, persistent. That approach has never failed me. By noon, I understood more than they ever thought I would bother to. What information was shared, what was hidden, what required confirmation, and what quietly went through without asking. It was all there, plainly visible, once you stopped being scared of pressing the wrong thing. I thought about all the times they'd said, "Careful, you might break it." as if I hadn't survived things far more fragile than an app. In the afternoon, I called the bank, not to accuse, just to ask questions. I spoke clearly, slowly, the way people my age are expected to. The woman on the line explained things without realizing I was mapping every word. Dates, authorizations, devices used to access my account. When she mentioned that changes had been made from a familiar device, I thanked her and hung up. Familiar to whom? I wondered. That evening, my son stopped by. He glanced at the desk and smiled indulgently. "Still playing with that thing?" he asked. "Yes," I said, returning the smile. "It keeps me sharp." He laughed, satisfied, and changed the subject. He didn't notice the notebook. He didn't notice how I'd stopped asking for help. People only notice weakness when it reassures them. After he left, I reviewed what I'd learned. I wasn't chasing secrets anymore. I was building understanding. Patterns were emerging, not dramatic, not criminal looking at first glance, just convenient. Decisions made without me, money redirected, information filtered. They hadn't done it out of hatred. That was the hardest part to accept. They did it because they thought they could, because I'd taught them, over years of patience and silence, that I wouldn't object. Before bed, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and studied my face. The same face that once negotiated contracts, stretched budgets, made impossible things work. I had allowed it to be reduced to confused because it was easier for everyone else. I turned off the light and lay down, my mind unusually calm. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't rehearsing confrontations. I was learning. They thought I didn't understand technology. What they still didn't understand was that once I decide to learn something, I don't stop halfway, and I don't forget. The first real confirmation came quietly, the way truth usually does when it's been living in your house for a long time. I was reviewing the transfers again, not because I expected something new, but because repetition sharpens the eye. Dates, amounts, references. I'd learned how to open the detailed view, how to trace where money paused before moving on. That was when I noticed one payment that didn't behave like the others. It appeared, disappeared, then reappeared under a slightly altered description, as if someone had changed its coat and hoped I wouldn't recognize the shape. I wrote it down. Then I searched for it. That search led me somewhere I hadn't expected. A service account registered under my name using my email, but with a phone number that wasn't mine. I stared at the screen for a long time before I felt anything at all. My first thought wasn't anger. It was embarrassment. The kind that creeps up when you realize how easily your identity can be borrowed if you've been generous with trust. I followed the steps to recover access. It asked questions I could answer because they were my life, not theirs. Dates, places, names that meant something to me. The system accepted me without resistance. That alone should have told me something. Inside the account were records, agreements, authorizations I had never signed, but that carried my name neatly typed at the bottom. I recognized the wording. I'd used similar language years ago when I still handled everything myself. Someone had copied my voice and expected me not to hear it. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. A memory surfaced, uninvited. My son, at 12, insisting he hadn't touched the cookie jar, the crumbs on his shirt, the careful look on his face. I remembered how I'd pretended to believe him because the truth would have required a conversation I was too tired to have that day. This felt the same, only now the cookie jar was my life. The phone rang while I was still sitting there. Another family check-in. another cheerful voice asking if I needed anything. I answered politely, even kindly. I have learned that people reveal more when they think you are calm. After the call, I returned to the documents. I printed what I could, saved copies where I was told old people never think to look. I labeled everything clearly. There is power in naming things properly. It keeps them from slipping away. By evening, my hands were aching, but my thoughts were precise. This wasn't one careless mistake. It was a system built gradually, on the assumption that I would never bother to look closely. That assumption had been their greatest comfort. I made myself dinner and ate it standing at the counter. I didn't feel like sitting. Something inside me had straightened its back. Later, I stood by the window and watched the lights come on across the street. Other people living their lives, making their small choices, trusting someone, being trusted in return. I wondered how many of them would one day be told, gently, that things were handled for them now. Before bed, I placed the notebook in the drawer beside my bed, not hidden, just within reach. I didn't need to remind myself what I'd found. I needed to remind myself that I was capable of finding it. They thought I didn't understand technology. What they didn't understand was that the moment I saw proof, not suspicion, not intuition, but proof, I stopped being confused. And once confusion leaves, fear usually follows it out the door. They say memory softens with age, that it blurs at the edges, loses accuracy. I've found the opposite to be true. What softens is tolerance. Once I had proof in my hands, my mind began pulling old moments out of storage, lining them up without sentiment. Things I'd brushed aside returned with a different weight. I remembered the first time they laughed at me for not knowing how to join a video call. I'd arrived 10 minutes late, flustered, apologizing. They exchanged looks, quick, amused, and my son said, "It's okay, Mom. We'll just explain it again." Again, as if I'd failed a test, as if effort itself were embarrassing. I remembered how decisions stopped being discussed and started being announced. "We already took care of it. You don't need to worry. This is better for you." Each phrase delivered gently, like medicine, each one removing me a little further from my own life. At the time, I told myself this was what aging looked like, that stepping back was natural, that good mothers don't make things difficult. But now, with documents in my drawer and numbers in my notebook, I could see the pattern clearly. The problem wasn't my age, it was my silence. I spent that day not on the phone, but in my head. I replayed conversations with new ears, not to punish myself, but to understand how I'd taught them who I was allowed to be. When you repeatedly accept being underestimated, people stop questioning it. In the afternoon, I took a walk. Slow, deliberate. The world hadn't changed just because I had. Children passed me on the sidewalk, barely noticing. A woman my age struggled with a grocery bag, and a stranger helped her without asking. Kindness still existed. Respect, too. Just not everywhere. When I returned home, there was a message waiting. Casual, almost affectionate, a reminder about an upcoming payment. Framed as concern. I read it twice, then placed the phone face down. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened an old photo album. Not out of nostalgia, but to anchor myself. There I was at 40, standing behind a counter, hair pinned back, eyes tired but alert. That woman negotiated leases, argued with suppliers, balanced budgets down to the last cent. No one questioned her competence then. They couldn't afford to. Somewhere along the way, I had traded authority for peace. And peace, I was learning, is often just quiet injustice. That evening, my son called again. He talked about his day, about work, about nothing important. He didn't ask how I was. I didn't volunteer it. When he mentioned handling a few things for me, I felt the old urge to agree quickly, to smooth the conversation. I didn't. "That won't be necessary," I said. There was a pause, just a fraction too long. "Oh," he replied. "Okay." After the call, I sat very still. That pause told me more than any document. People react to change before they understand it. I wasn't angry. Anger burns fast and leaves ash. What I felt was steadiness, the kind that comes when you stop doubting your right to see clearly. Before bed, I wrote one sentence at the top of a new page. "I am not confused. I am informed." They thought I didn't understand technology. What they never understood was that my real education came long before screens. In watching people, in noticing tone, in knowing when respect quietly disappears and deciding finally that it's time to take it back. By the seventh day, I stopped thinking of it as learning technology. It had become something else entirely, an excavation. I followed threads the way I used to follow loose ends in paperwork years ago. One reference number led to a confirmation email. That email led to a shared folder. The folder led to documents I was never meant to open because no one thought I would know how. The arrogance of that still surprises me. There were messages archived, not deleted. People my age are assumed not to know the difference. Conversations about me, but never to me. My name reduced to a problem to be managed, a variable to be controlled. She won't notice. She trusts us. We'll explain it if she asks. They spoke about me the way you speak about weather or traffic. An inconvenience, not a person. I read slowly. I didn't skim. Skimming is what gets you fooled. I noted dates, compared tones. How polite they were when writing directly to me, how efficient when discussing me with each other. It was almost professional. That hurt more than cruelty would have. One message, written months earlier, made me close my eyes. It discussed timing, waiting until after my birthday, after the holidays, after she settles down again, as if awareness were a temporary illness, as if clarity passed on its own. I stood up and went to the sink, running cold water over my wrists, the way I was taught long ago when emotions threatened to blur judgment. This wasn't grief. It was recognition. I saw how neatly they had divided roles. One handled money. One handled communication. One handled reassurance. No villains. No shouting. Just quiet cooperation built on the certainty that I wouldn't interfere. In the afternoon, I received another call. This time it was framed as concern for my health. Had I been tired lately? Confused? Forgetful? The questions were gentle, almost loving. I answered them honestly. I said I felt clear. There was silence on the other end. Then relief, poorly hidden. After the call, I opened the calendar app they'd insisted on syncing for me. I scrolled back. Appointments I hadn't scheduled. Cancellations I hadn't requested. Adjustments that made my life easier for them and smaller for me. It was all so tidy. I didn't cry. That surprised me most of all. Tears come when you still hope things are different. I no longer did. As evening fell, I organized everything into folders with names that made sense to me. Dates, categories, evidence. Not for revenge, for truth. Truth requires structure, or it dissolves into noise. I sat in the quiet living room, the lamp casting a soft circle of light, and thought about how often older women are told to let go. Let go of control, let go of details, let go of questions. What no one tells you is that letting go without consent is just another form of taking. They thought I didn't understand technology. What they never considered was that I understood systems. And once you see the system, every secret stops being personal and starts being obvious. The worst discovery had nothing to do with money. I found it late at night, when my eyes were already tired and I was about to stop. It was buried deeper than the rest, not because it was hidden well, but because it was disguised as concern. A long message thread, familiar names, familiar tone, the kind of tone people use when they believe they are being reasonable. They were discussing whether I should still live alone. Not openly, not cruelly, carefully, as if I were a fragile object that might crack if spoken about too directly. Phrases like, "For her own safety," "She's not as sharp as she used to be," "We should be ready." Ready for what, they didn't say at first. Then someone finally did. If we need to make decisions without her, it's better to already have everything in place. I read that line several times. Not because I didn't understand it, but because my body needed time to accept it. They weren't planning to help me. They were planning to replace me. I sat very still. My hands rested flat on the desk, palms down, like I was anchoring myself to the room. The house was silent, except for the ticking clock on the wall. That clock had been with me longer than some of the people discussing my future. There were references to doctors I hadn't seen, evaluations I hadn't agreed to, conversations I'd never been part of. They spoke about my memory, my judgment, my decline, with a confidence that came from repetition, not truth. Say something often enough, and it begins to sound official. What struck me most was how calm they were. No guilt, no hesitation, just planning. I thought back to all the times I'd laughed off their jokes about me being forgetful. All the times I'd accepted help I didn't need because refusing it felt rude. I saw now how those small concessions had been collected, stacked neatly, turned into justification. I wasn't afraid. That surprised me. I felt something heavier, but steadier. A grief without panic. Grief for the version of my family I thought I had. Grief for the assumption that love alone protects you. I closed the messages and turned off the phone. I went to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, looking at my hands. These hands know the difference between weakness and rest. They know when something is being taken under the excuse of care. I remembered my mother, toward the end of her life, being spoken over in the same gentle voices. How decisions were made for her. How she shrank without ever raising her voice. I had sworn I wouldn't let that happen to me. And yet here I was, almost there, saved only by the fact that someone underestimated my curiosity. The next morning, I woke early and dressed carefully, as if I were going somewhere important. I made breakfast, ate slowly, and read the newspaper like nothing had changed. On the outside, nothing had. Inside, everything had. I began a new list, not of transactions or messages, but of boundaries. Things that were mine, decisions that required my voice, lines that could no longer be crossed quietly. This was no longer about catching them. It was about stopping them. I wasn't angry enough to be reckless. I wasn't scared enough to be silent. I was exactly where I needed to be. Clear. They thought I didn't understand technology. What they truly failed to understand was that the most dangerous moment is when a woman my age stops hoping people will do the right thing and starts preparing to protect herself instead. Part of me wanted to stop. That was the truth I didn't like admitting, even to myself. After everything I'd seen, everything I now understood, There was a quiet voice suggesting I let it rest. I was 78. Tiredness comes easier at this age than courage. Silence has a soft pull, like a familiar chair you've sat in for years. I spent that day doing ordinary things on purpose. Laundry, dusting, watering the plant by the window I keep forgetting the name of. I wanted to see if normal life could still hold me, if I could put the knowledge back where I found it and return to being agreeable, grateful, undemanding. For a few hours, it almost worked. Then I caught myself rehearsing excuses in my head. They mean well. They're just worried. Families do this. I recognized the habit immediately. That was the old reflex, smoothing sharp edges before anyone else had to feel them. I sat down heavily in the armchair and let the thought finish itself honestly. If I stop now, this will happen anyway. Just later, without warning, without my consent. That was the moment the hesitation cracked. It wasn't fear of confrontation that had slowed me. It was fear of loneliness. Once you stop being useful, once you stop being pliable, people pull away. I had seen it happen to others. I had comforted women who said, in quiet voices, "They don't call much anymore." I didn't want that future. But I realized something worse existed, being present, but erased. In the afternoon, my granddaughter stopped by unexpectedly. She chatted, drank tea, showed me something on her phone. At one point, she laughed and said, "You know, Dad says you're getting a little stubborn lately." She didn't mean harm. She said it fondly, like stubbornness was a quirk, not a boundary. I smiled, because that's what people expect. But inside, something settled into place. Stubborn, at my age, is just another word for no longer obedient. After she left, I opened the drawer beside my bed and took out everything I had gathered. Notes, copies, printed messages. I spread them out slowly, like cards on a table. I didn't rush. I wanted to feel their weight. I asked myself one question, and I answered it honestly. If I do nothing, what happens next? The answer was clear. More decisions made without me. More gentle concern used as leverage. One day, a conversation framed as inevitable, a document placed in front of me when I was tired. A smile meant to reassure while control slipped quietly away. I had seen that story before. I had buried women who lived it. That evening, I stood in the bathroom and looked at myself for a long time. Not searching for strength, just confirming presence. I was still here, still capable, still allowed to decide. I didn't need to move fast. Speed makes mistakes. What I needed was direction. I sat down and wrote a short list. Not plans, principles. I will not argue about my competence. I will not explain my curiosity. I will not expose anything until I am ready. That last one mattered most. Once truth is spoken, it cannot be reshaped. I wanted it whole. Before bed, I turned off the phone and lay in the dark, listening to my breathing. I thought about how many years I had spent protecting others from discomfort. How rarely anyone had protected me in return. I wasn't choosing conflict. I was choosing presence. They thought I didn't understand technology. What they didn't understand was that my hesitation wasn't weakness. It was judgment. And once judgment is complete, there is no turning back, only forward, carefully, on my own terms. By the time I was ready to act, the fear had burned off and left something cleaner behind. I didn't wake up that morning with a plan carved in stone. I woke up with resolve, which is different. Plans can change. Resolve doesn't need to. I made my bed, opened the curtains, and stood for a moment, watching the street come alive. People leaving for work, walking dogs, living inside choices they still owned. I intended to keep owning mine. I started with the practical things. Not dramatic, not confrontational. Practicality has always been my strength. I called the bank again, this time asking for an in-person appointment. I didn't explain why. I didn't apologize. I said my name, my age, and that I preferred to handle certain matters face to face. The woman on the line hesitated for half a second, then agreed. After that, I called a lawyer whose card I'd kept for years in a drawer, just in case. We had never been close, but he'd handled matters for women like me before. Widows, business owners, people who didn't shout but expected precision. He recognized my name immediately. That, too, told me something. I didn't mention my family. I didn't accuse anyone. I asked about protection, about consent, about what could be done quietly and legally before anything became urgent. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "You're asking the right questions at the right time." That was when I knew I wasn't late. I was early. In the afternoon, I sat at my desk and reviewed everything one more time. Not to doubt myself, but to be thorough. I imagined every possible response they might have once they realized I was no longer passive. Denial, concern, anger disguised as worry. I had lived with these people my whole life. I knew their rhythms. I practiced saying nothing. That evening, my son called. He sounded unsettled, though he tried to mask it with humor. He asked if everything was all right, if I'd been feeling stressed lately. The questions were careful now, measured. "I'm fine," I said, and this time, there was no double meaning. After the call, I placed my phone on the table and sat with my hands folded, the way I used to before making decisions that couldn't be undone. I felt no rush, no thrill, just steadiness. This wasn't about exposure yet. It was about position. You don't step into the light until you've secured your footing. Before bed, I organized my drawer one last time. Everything labeled, everything dated, everything ready. I wasn't collecting weapons, I was building walls. I slept deeply that night, the kind of sleep that comes when you stop bargaining with reality. They thought I didn't understand technology. What they didn't understand was that my real move wasn't digital at all. It was deciding that my life at 78 was still mine to defend, calmly, legally, and without asking permission. The meeting with the lawyer was quiet, and that was exactly how I wanted it. His office was small, orderly, the kind of place where nothing was displayed for effect. No loud diplomas, no motivational quotes, just shelves, files, and a man who listened more than he spoke. I sat across from him with my handbag on my lap, my back straight, my voice steady. "I don't want to accuse anyone," I said. "I want to make sure no one can decide my life for me." He nodded once, slowly, not surprised, not skeptical, as if he'd heard this sentence before, spoken by women who waited just long enough. We went through things methodically: powers of attorney, account access, medical directives, digital authorizations. Each topic peeled back another layer of vulnerability I hadn't realized existed, not because I was careless, because I had trusted the wrong silence. "Right now," he said, tapping a folder, "too many decisions could be made without your explicit consent. Not illegally, just conveniently. Conveniently. That word again. I signed nothing that day. I asked questions. I took notes. I listened. Knowledge first, action second. That order has saved me more than once in my life. From there, I went to the bank. The branch smelled faintly of disinfectant and paper, a comforting combination. The young man who greeted me spoke slowly at first, until he saw how directly I met his eyes. Then his tone changed. Respect adjusts itself when it realizes it's required. I asked to review access logs, devices, authorizations, notifications I hadn't been receiving. When he hesitated, I reminded him calmly that the account was mine and that I was present. It's remarkable how many doors open when you stop sounding apologetic. We corrected things, one by one, removed secondary access, changed confirmations, updated contact details. I watched his screen as carefully as he did. When he finished, he asked if I wanted help setting up alerts. No, I said. I want to see everything myself. He smiled then, not indulgently, but with something closer to admiration. By the time I got home, I was tired in my bones, but lighter in my chest. Control doesn't feel dramatic when it returns. It feels familiar, like something you misplaced and finally found where you left it. That evening, messages started coming in. Subtle at first. Questions disguised as concern. Offers of help I hadn't requested. I answered politely, briefly. I didn't explain my day. I didn't need to. The next morning, I made one final appointment with my doctor. Not because anyone had forced me, because I wanted documentation, clarity, proof that my mind was as sharp as it felt. The examination was thorough, the results unremarkable, healthy for my age, capable, present. I asked for copies. When I placed them in the folder at home, I felt something close to satisfaction. Not triumph. Readiness. They still didn't know, not yet. And that was important. People behave most honestly when they think the ground beneath them is stable. I sat at my desk that night, the lamp casting a warm circle of light, and reviewed everything I had put in place. Legally, financially, medically, digitally. Quiet defenses, built without confrontation. I wasn't building a case to punish them. I was building a life they could no longer rearrange behind my back. I turned off the lamp and sat in the dark for a moment, listening to the house breathe around me. I felt no urge to call anyone, no need to be seen. They thought I didn't understand technology. What they still didn't understand was that I had just removed every silent lever they had been pulling, and I had done it so cleanly that they wouldn't feel the absence until they tried to use them again. They noticed before they understood. People always do. It started with small things, a payment that didn't go through, a confirmation code that didn't arrive where it usually did, a polite but firm response from the bank instead of the easy workaround they'd grown used to. Nothing dramatic, just enough friction to make them uneasy. My phone rang more often that week. Not accusations? Not yet. Questions wrapped in concern. Had I changed something by accident? Was I feeling overwhelmed? Did I maybe press the wrong button? Each question carried the same assumption that whatever had happened was unintentional, that I was still the kind of woman things happened to, not because of. I answered kindly, briefly. I gave them nothing to push against. I'm managing things, I said. That phrase unsettled them more than anger would have. I could hear it in the pauses that followed. Silence is frightening when you've built your comfort on access. My son came by one afternoon without calling first. He stood in the doorway, looking around as if expecting to see signs of disorder. Papers everywhere. Confusion. Some visual proof that I needed help. Instead, the house was, as it always had been, clean, quiet, in control. "You seem busy," he said, glancing at the desk. "Yes," I replied. "I've been taking care of some things." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He asked if I needed help with anything. I said no. He lingered, clearly unsure of his role now that it hadn't been assigned. Before he left, he said, "You know, if anything feels complicated, you can always ask." "I know," I said, and I meant it differently than he heard. After that, the messages changed tone, less warmth, more urgency. They asked about specific things now, specific accounts, specific appointments. They were testing doors to see which ones still opened. Most of them didn't. One evening, my granddaughter called, confused and slightly upset. Something she used to handle easily had suddenly become difficult. She said the system must be glitching. I told her I wasn't experiencing any problems. There was a long silence. "Oh," she said finally. "Okay." That was when I knew the discomfort had spread through them like a draft through a house. Not panic yet. Just the realization that something fundamental had shifted. I watched them respond the way people do when control slips quietly away. They tried to reframe the situation. They told themselves stories. That I was being stubborn. That I was influenced. That this phase would pass. I let them believe it. At night, I sat with my tea and thought about how often older women are expected to announce their intentions loudly to be taken seriously. I had chosen the opposite. I had let the evidence speak first. By the end of the week, they were restless. Invitations appeared. Sudden interest in my schedule. Offers to review things together. I declined without drama. "I'm fine," I said. "Everything is in order." Order is a threatening word to people who benefit from chaos. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. The way I used to feel when a difficult negotiation was nearing its end and the other side had just realized I wasn't bluffing. They still didn't know everything. Not yet. But they knew enough to be afraid of what they didn't know. And that was important. They thought I didn't understand technology. What they were beginning to understand now was that I had removed myself from their reach, quietly, deliberately, and that whatever came next would happen on my terms, not theirs. The moment came without ceremony, which felt fitting. It wasn't a confrontation staged in anger or a dramatic gathering around a table. It was a simple request, a meeting, framed as concern. My son suggested we all talk openly, so there wouldn't be misunderstandings. That word again, misunderstandings, as if truth had merely tripped and fallen on its own. I agreed. We met at my house. Neutral ground, though they'd forgotten it was still mine. They arrived together, carrying the air of people who believe they are being generous with their time. Polite smiles, careful tones, chairs chosen strategically, as if position still mattered. They spoke first. They always do when they think they're in control. They asked how I was feeling, if I'd been stressed, if I'd noticed myself getting overwhelmed lately. One of them mentioned how confusing modern systems can be, especially for someone my age. They spoke slowly, kindly, rehearsed. I listened without interrupting. I let the silence stretch just enough to unsettle them. Then I reached for the folder. I didn't slide it across the table dramatically. I opened it calmly, the way I used to open ledgers when someone insisted numbers were wrong. I didn't accuse. I didn't raise my voice. I simply began to read. Dates, amounts, authorizations, messages, exact words spoken back to them without commentary. I watched their faces carefully. The first reaction wasn't guilt. It was confusion. the pure shock of being seen. "That's not what it looks like," someone said too quickly. "I'm sure it isn't," I replied, which is why I took the time to understand it fully. The room shifted then. Chairs adjusted. Breathing changed. They realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was preparation. I showed them the bank changes, the removed access, the updated directives, the medical evaluation, everything neat, everything documented. I didn't explain my reasons. I didn't need to. The facts stood on their own. They tried a new approach after that. Emotion. Hurt. How could I think so little of them? How could I go behind their backs? That question almost made me smile. "I didn't go behind anyone's back," I said. "I stepped back into my own life." Silence followed. Not the comfortable kind. One of them asked what I wanted now. Apologies? Control? An admission of wrongdoing? The way they asked told me they still thought this was a negotiation. "I want what I've always wanted," I said. "To be consulted, to be respected, to not have my life arranged like a storage unit." No one interrupted me then. They asked if I was going to expose everything, if I planned to tell others. The question revealed more than they intended. Fear sharpens honesty. "No," I said. "I don't need an audience. I needed boundaries." That was the moment something broke. Not loudly. Quietly. The understanding that whatever dynamic had existed before was over. That the version of me who smiled and deferred was gone. They left soon after. Not angry. Shaken. That was enough. When the door closed, I didn't rush to sit down. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, feeling the weight of the house settle back into itself. I felt tired. But it was the good kind of tired. The kind that comes after finishing something important. I returned the folder to the drawer and closed it gently. Not locked, not hidden, just finished. They thought I didn't understand technology. What they finally understood was far more uncomfortable, that I understood them. And once that understanding was spoken out loud, there was no pretending it hadn't been there all along. They didn't leave me alone after that. I hadn't expected them to. The next few days unfolded like a predictable script once you know the genre. First came the apologies. Careful, conditional. "We didn't mean it that way. You misunderstood our intentions. We were only trying to help." Help, I noticed, was always something done to me, never with me. My phone rang at odd hours. Messages arrived late at night, early in the morning, long paragraphs explaining context I hadn't asked for, short ones pretending nothing had happened. Each attempt circled the same idea. Restoring the old balance without admitting it had ever been wrong. I answered some. I ignored others. That, too, was a choice. When my son came again, he looked smaller somehow, less certain. He sat where he'd always sat, but his posture had changed. He spoke about family, about loyalty, about how painful it was to feel distrusted. He never spoke about consent. "You could have just talked to us," he said at one point, frustration leaking through the calm. "I did," I replied. "For years. You just didn't hear it." That ended the conversation more effectively than any argument. They tried a different approach after that. Softness, nostalgia, stories from my past, retold as if they were reminders of who I used to be, as if strength were something I'd misplaced instead of something I'd carried quietly. One evening, my granddaughter cried. Real tears this time. She said everything felt unstable now, that I'd scared them, that they didn't know where they stood with me anymore. I held her hand and told her the truth, gently. "You stand exactly where you always have," I said. You're just seeing the ground clearly now. That was the hardest part, accepting that my boundary caused discomfort. Women my age are trained to treat discomfort as failure. But discomfort is sometimes just the body learning a new position. They asked eventually what would happen next, whether things could go back to normal. I thought about that word for a long time after they left. Normal had meant silence. Normal had meant being spoken for. Normal had meant smiling so others wouldn't feel awkward about diminishing me. I realized then that I didn't want normal. I wanted honest. I'm open to a new normal, I said finally. One where I'm included, not managed. They nodded. Whether they understood or not, I couldn't say. The days grew quieter after that. Fewer messages. More distance. I felt the space like a bruise at first. Tender. Aching. Loneliness doesn't disappear just because it was necessary. But something else grew in its place. I began to enjoy my mornings again. I read without interruption. I made decisions without rehearsing how they'd sound to someone else. I noticed how much energy had been spent on staying agreeable. One afternoon, I caught myself laughing out loud at something on the radio. The sound startled me. It had been a while. They still thought, perhaps, that I'd acted out of stubbornness, or pride, or fear of aging. Let them think that. Labels are another way people avoid listening. What mattered was this. I had not raised my voice. I had not begged. I had not shamed them publicly. I had simply refused to continue disappearing. And that refusal held. They thought I didn't understand technology. What they were still learning was that the real shock wasn't my competence. It was my calm. Because calm means the decision is already made and there is no going back to the way things were before. I don't wake up thinking about them anymore. That may be the quietest victory of all. Mornings have become mine again. I sit by the window with my tea and let the day arrive without bracing myself for messages, for requests, for carefully worded concern. The phone still sits on the table, but it no longer feels like a test I might fail. It's just an object now, useful, neutral, honest if you let it be. My family adjusted, as people always do when they realize something will not be negotiated back. Some quicker than others, some never fully. There are still pauses in conversations, careful phrasing, a new awareness that I am listening. Not vaguely, not indulgently, but clearly. And yes, there is distance. I won't pretend there isn't. Boundaries create space, and space can ache, but it is a clean ache. It doesn't rot inside you the way silent humiliation does. I still see my granddaughter. We talk differently now, more directly. She no longer jokes about me being out of touch. She asks my opinion and waits for the answer. That matters more to me than apologies ever could. As for my son, our relationship is quieter, less performative. We speak like two adults who understand that love does not cancel accountability. He no longer manages my life. I no longer soften my words to protect his comfort. It is not warm, but it is real. Sometimes I think about how close I came to disappearing politely. How easy it would have been to keep smiling, keep nodding, keep letting decisions be made for me because it was easier for everyone else. Age gives you that temptation to shrink, to simplify yourself so the world doesn't have to adjust. But here's the thing no one tells you when you get old. You are not required to fade quietly. I didn't expose them publicly. I didn't humiliate anyone. I didn't shout or threaten or destroy. I simply learned. I paid attention. I used the very tools they mocked me for not understanding. and saw the truth laid out plainly, without drama. Technology didn't give me power, it gave me visibility. And visibility, at my age, is dangerous to people who benefit from your silence. I am still 78. My knees still ache. I still forget where I put my glasses sometimes. None of that changed. What changed was my posture in the world. I stand where I stand now, not where others find it convenient to place me. If you're reading this and you recognize yourself, the quiet mother, the patient grandmother, the woman who's told she doesn't need to understand, listen to me carefully. You don't have to be loud to be formidable. You don't have to be young to be sharp. And you don't have to accept being handled just because it's wrapped in concern. Learn. Ask. Look. Even if your hands shake. Especially then. They thought I didn't understand technology. What they never truly understood was this. I have lived long enough to know when my dignity is at risk, and I am old enough now to protect it without asking permission. If this story spoke to you, don't scroll past it in silence. Share it with another woman who's been told she's too old to notice. Leave a comment if you've ever been underestimated and survived it.